So get this, a move by the Malawian Agriculture Ministry to get former world boxing champion Mike Tyson as a cannabis ambassador has been met with criticism in some circles. The former boxer was imprisoned for sex offences in the 1990s, but has now also invested in the business of cannabis. The Malawi government says the United States Cannabis Association was facilitating the deal with Tyson. Joining us for perspective on this matter is Tseli Khiba, founder and CEO of Oane Solutions, of a cannabis consulting company based in Lesotho. She joins us from Maseru. Madumemba, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I guess Mike Tyson, if you will, is a sideshow to the bigger issue, right, of how to cultivate this industry for the continent. So when we look at the biggest producers of cannabis in the world, where do we sit as a continent?
Hi, thank you, Dudu. Thank you for the introduction. Historically, the African continent has been recorded as being one of the largest producers globally of cannabis, more specifically Morocco in North Africa. And I think that says a lot about where we find ourselves today, where we have an emerging legal industry.
If we are the biggest producers in the world, why is our attitude so hostile to the herb? I ask you, for instance, in Nigeria, they have Operation Burn the Weed. And you've got a number of other countries which have not legalized, the herb, or even went into production and cultivating it for economic purposes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the short answer would take us back to colonialism and prejudicial laws that came into play at the earliest around the 19th century. And I think those were really the laws and the laws that were implemented that altered people's attitudes and perceptions around the cannabis plant. Because before then, the plant had been used for centuries across the continent. It is said to have first emerged in eastern parts of Asia and traveled along across into the African continent and Europe as well, and then further across the Atlantic. So when we look at history and the relationships that colonial masters have had with their laborers, who were typically black, colored, Indian, and Asian, they, at the time, and it still persists in different ways and manifests in different ways today, they were very concerned about their laborers' productivity and what that meant in terms of development and just that race around, dominance and imperial systems. And that has had a profound impact on the drug laws and treaties, which unfortunately a lot of African countries have implemented and domesticated into their local laws.
In my very simple thinking, there's no excuse to still uphold that, right? So how do we then, beyond producing at a primary level, how does the continent invest in value addition and expanding?
I think it really starts with changing attitudes and education and investing more in research so that we can also understand what the plant is and what it can do. Because I think traditionally there was that understanding that was already established, but it's just been distorted. So I think the first step would be getting back to what we already knew. And from then on, I think we need to also look to where we are currently, separately and also together as a continent. As member states, we're signatories to these international treaties. And from the reading of these treaties, I think there is already substantial leeway within the current framework to enact laws that are better contextualized and better serve African countries. So I think it's also engaging and talking to policymakers around how we can implement and extract those flexibilities and implement them in such a way that work for us as Africans. And in terms of looking beyond just cultivation, I think we've had, different experiences with coffee, tobacco, water, diamonds. The list is endless of the resources that we've seen exploited across the continent. And I think we can take lessons from those experiences and implement strategies and approaches to the cannabis industry that is more progressive and from which we would be able to extract more long-term value.
Swaziland, for instance, has high quality, not just seeds, but cannabis. You've got Malawi Gold, and I guess this is what they are hoping to promote with Mike Tyson. Are there examples, though, on the continent of countries who are doing very well where this is concerned?
Yes, there are. speaking from Lesotho, as a Lesotho, I'm very proud to say that I think we have been leading the continent in terms of progressive policies and approaches, particularly to the commercial side of the cannabis industry. We have very good examples with a number of companies, which I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention by name, that have been leading the pack. So there's that when we look at Lesotho. But then again, when we look at South Africa is the only African country that has decriminalized cannabis. So it's also progressive in that, from that perspective as well. And as far as using Mike Tyson as an ambassador, I mean, he has been a controversial figure, so I think there's a lot to be said about the choice of ambassador. But I do think it's an interesting strategy to attract investors and create hype and to sort of put, or to distinguish Malawi from, what maybe other African member states are doing currently.
And that's just it, right, on this ambassadorship of Mike Tyson. Say what you will about him. This government is saying that they're hoping that his backing will rope in some investors and even potential buyers. We always speak about collaborations on the continent, given that we are the biggest producers. How then do, stop speaking in silos and start singing from the same hymn book to realize the economic potentials of this?
Absolutely. And I think, given our different histories and experiences, not just linked to colonialism, but just how we identify ourselves as different African member states, we are bound to see different patterns and different approaches to the cannabis industry. For example, some countries have taken a more conservative line, such as Rwanda, which is, a very limited scope whereby they're mainly looking to export. Ghana has come on board in some shape in terms of allowing for medicinal and hemp, I believe. So I think a lot of African countries are grappling with this current issue and trying to determine what would be the best way to go forward.
How do we dispel, these myths? You still find some sectors of the population that say, well, this is a gateway to doing, bigger drugs, if you will, or more hardcore drugs. How do we demystify that?
I think it's really through education and through conversations and through platforms such as this, where we can have honest conversations about the plant and where we can also address a lot of the questions and fears that people have about cannabis. Whether it's the gateway argument, because then we can always argue that tobacco and alcohol are the real gateway drugs. There are also concerns about the impact that cannabis has on the mental health of individuals. We can also talk about adolescents and their exposure to cannabis and what that means for their futures and development. So I think it's through education where we can also discuss the risks that I would also be open to engaging with those questions, because I think as much as it really falls within the medical realm, I think making such scientific evidence accessible also helps to dispel a lot of these perceptions which can be addressed.
I guess the issue of licensing also needs to be explored, right? Where private sector and government work together, who takes precedence?
Absolutely. And I think one of the main cries we've seen and heard across the continent is the high license fees, and it's been justified using different arguments by lawmakers and ministries and so on. And I think it also needs to be, really dissected, because on one hand, yes, they're trying to prevent this influx of producers, they're trying to regulate the market, they're trying to keep it in a way that is manageable. However, it really has a big impact on the local farmers who have been doing this for years and for centuries, and it makes, the industry inaccessible. And again, it perpetuates that distinction between the illicit market and the legal market, which I don't believe is sustainable.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Tseli Khiba is the founder and CEO of Oane Solutions, a cannabis consulting company. Thank you.